cowboys with six-shooters, covered wagons crossing the plains, and Native Americans adorned with war paint and feathers. These are the images most people associate with America's Old West. But might there be more to the story? Much, much more? We think of the Old West, and the last thing we imagine is Billy the Kid chasing a flying saucer across the desert. From cowboys to lawyers, doctors to housewives washing clothes and tending sheep, people were seeing things in the sky they couldn't explain. This is a replica of one of the bars that was in one of the lightships, and they're guarded by the Star People. Ancient aliens have been around for tens of thousands, if not millions of years. Why would they avoid the American Southwest? Millions of people around the world believe we have been visited in the past by extraterrestrial beings. What if it were true? Did ancient aliens really help to shape our history? And did the cowboys and natives of America's Wild West actually come in contact with alien beings from another, much more distant frontier? What kind of a man goes around blowing up other people's cows? You wouldn't believe it. There's white lights. There's bright lights. There was this big light. You fell in the river, and when you came back, two of my best hands had just disappeared. There was no lightning. In the 2011 film, Cowboys Aliens. A man awakens in the desert with no clue to his past except for a mysterious metal device shackled to his wrist. This may provide the key not only to his identity, but to his ability to protect the town of Absolution from a deadly attack by alien spaceships. Based on the graphic novel by Scott Mitchell Rosenberg and directed by visionary filmmaker Jon Favreau. Cowboys Aliens skillfully blends the conventions of the classic Hollywood Western with the futuristic effects of an alien invasion film. But although Cowboys Aliens is the product of its creator's imagination, there are those who believe this story might have roots in historical facts. Aurora, Texas. This rural southwestern town covers an area of just over 3 square miles. Headstones at the local cemetery mark the final resting places of the area's hard-working ranchers and farmers. But one body allegedly buried here has no marker at all. The Aurora Cemetery was founded in 1861, right at the start of the war between the states. The Texas State Historical Commission has a marker here that states the cemetery is well known because of the legend that a spaceship crashed nearby in 1897, and the pilot killed in the crash was buried here. 50 years before the United States Army announced that a flying disc had crashed at Roswell, New Mexico, there was a report of a strange unidentified object that crashed on the property of a local judge on an April morning in 1897. An airship supposedly ran into a windmill on the property of a gentleman named Judge Proctor. The ship exploded in flames and was burnt to a crisp, essentially. There was an explosion. In those days, this was before television, before jet aircraft. Any big noise got your attention. Plus, the ground shook, so they knew something tremendous had happened. A local reporter arrived on the scene. He reported that there was a large debris field, and also that there were the charred remains of what appeared to be, to him, an alien from another planet. The occupant, described as unworldly by witnesses, was given a Christian burial and put in an unmarked grave. In 1897, this was 6 years before the Wright brothers actually made heavier-than-aircraft work. So this is why I consider the Aurora spaceship crash the smoking gun of the UFO controversy. Because this occurred 6 years before there was anything man-made in the air. Witnesses claimed that debris from the crash was recovered by local law enforcement and never seen again. Others claim that Judge Proctor buried it at the bottom of a deep well. For decades, the incident remained largely forgotten until 1945, when a man named Brawley Oates, who had purchased Proctor's land, reportedly was cleaning out the debris from the well when he later developed an extremely severe case of arthritis, which he claimed was the result of contaminated water. He believed that the water from the well contained some sort of element that gave him a severe case of arthritis, so bad that it eventually killed him. So a lot of people today wonder if the well wasn't contaminated with some sort of radioactive agent, which was the rationale behind his arthritis. We find that people who were using that well actually got ill, And so what happens at that moment in time is that the descendants of these people actually decide to cement the well. The incident at Roswell in 1947 also began stirring controversy about the Aurora incident, this time concerning the strange body supposedly still resting in an unmarked grave. Researchers wanted to exhume the body, but the local cemetery association wouldn't let them. My first question is, why not? What's it going to hurt? As a historian, it makes me suspicious when somebody's trying to hide something from you or tells you you can't do something. I first got onto the Aurora story back in 1973 and was there before the tombstone went missing. I'm actually probably one of the few people around who still remember where the actual gravesite was. The little grave is located right here. It was a short little grave, that of a child or very small person, and the little headstone marker was right about there. A few years ago, scientists with ground-penetrating radar established that there really had been a short grave here. Now, back in 1973, Bill Case was the aviation writer for the Dallas Times-Herald, and I was working for the Star-Telegram. We met up here. He had a metal detector, and we found 3 readings of metal in the grave. A couple of months after the headstone went missing, Bill invited me to meet him up here. We went over the grave, and there were no readings in the grave. He showed me 3 little holes that had been drilled in the grave. Someone had extracted the metal from the grave. In recent decades, further investigation of the crash site has turned up inconclusive evidence, including unusually high traces of aluminum at the bottom of the now sealed well, where Judge Proctor had supposedly disposed of the wreckage. Could the events that happened on the Texas farm in the early hours of April 17, 1897, really be evidence of an alien close encounter? Could it have been the first such event to occur in America's western region, or was it only one of many? Adams County, Ohio. At the end of the 1700s, President George Washington awarded what was then the uncharted land beyond the Appalachian Mountains to Revolutionary War veterans in 600-acre parcels as payment for their service. But when the settlers arrived, they found much of the land covered with thousands of Indian burial mounds, and one of these was very different from the rest. Imagine when you're pushing west, and all of a sudden, you find this gigantic effigy mound in the form of a serpent. What you have is a gigantic structure that just sits there in the middle of a very interesting landscape. Serpent Mound was one of the amazing, mysterious mounds found by the first settlers as they came over the Appalachian Mountains. There were thousands of mounds, but Serpent Mound must have been special. Like the Nazca Lines in Peru, Serpent Mound is a giant prehistoric structure that looks as though it is meant to be viewed only from the sky. When you see the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio, it's massively huge, and it can't really be appreciated when you're standing there looking at it. What we have here is meant to be seen from the sky. It's mysterious in the fact that it is on an elevated plateau and concealed from the world, unless you're flying over in a plane. And it's on very uneven ground, and really, to lay that out and make it right, you'd almost have to be above looking down to get it right, which is a mystery. This 1,330-foot-long structure winds across the land and depicts a coiled snake eating what appears to be an egg. It is the largest effigy mound in the world, and curiously, unlike most Native American mounds, the Great Serpent Mound was not constructed for burials. Serpent Mound had no burials. It's one of those mysterious mounds that offered us no clue as to who the builders were. But on the property, there were burial mounds dated from about the very early Adena period, nearly 3,000 years ago. Another curious aspect of Serpent Mound is where the ancient Native Americans chose to build it, on the outside swell of a 5-mile-wide meteor crater. 300 million years ago, a meteor came into this area and struck the Earth going about 50,000 miles an hour. The Serpent Mound is built right on the very edge of the crater, and there's magnetic anomalies and faults that go across the Serpent Mound, and the Native Americans could douse them, and they could feel the positive energy that's coming out of the ground. If you bring a compass to the Great Serpent Mound, there are certain spots where the compass needle just keeps going. So obviously we have some weird magnetic fields there, and also some gravitational anomalies. The myth has it that the Native Americans, when they came here, could see birds, similar to passenger pigeons or homing pigeons, circling by the millions because within the skull of the pigeon is a little piece of hematite or magnetite, and that's how they navigate, and they couldn't figure out where north was. Can you imagine millions of birds flying in a circle 5 miles wide? In addition to creating magnetic anomalies, the meteor also deposited a number of elements not indigenous to the area, including one of the rarest elements on Earth, iridium. When we look at the location of the Serpent Mound, we find not only that there is iron, that there is uranium, and also iridium. Iridium can withstand temperatures up to 2,000 degrees Celsius. It is non-corrosive, and it's actually been used in unmanned spacecraft. A lot of iridium apparently comes from outer space, rather than being found on the Earth. There is a use of iridium for thermoelectric circuits. These deep space probes include actually a radioactive source, because it's the only thing that can provide enough power when you're out beyond Jupiter, and there's no sunlight, and there's no nothing. We have iron, iridium, and uranium, three substances which definitely should not be considered to be of any use to Native Americans. The question then is, to whom are they of use? Ancient astronaut theorists believe extraterrestrials may have come to this site to mine iridium for their spacecraft, and point to numerous caves found in the crater swell beneath the mound as evidence of this. Right here, we can see one of those caves. It's pretty large. And since this site is believed to be many, many millions of years old, there's a chance that there are many, many caves. But if alien visitors really did come here to mine iridium and other elements, might this explain why the Serpent Mound was built on a scale that made its shape visible from the sky? The Serpent Mound is a marker for space. According to the Shawnee Indians, they're convinced that space travelers are using Serpent Mound as a marker. According to Zuni elder Clifford Mahooty, the Shawnee aren't the only Native Americans who believe Serpent Mound has an extraterrestrial connection. The Star Ancestors taught the American Indians about where they came from and how they're supposed to carry out their rituals. The mound builders, I believe, were those Indian tribes that had contact with the extraterrestrials. That's the essence of our culture, and the mounds were a place where we would practice and learn from those beings that come in from outside of this world to visit. Ancient astronaut theorists also point to the placement and shape of the Great Serpent Mound as proof of its extraterrestrial origins. The serpent itself was aligned to a constellation that had its apex at the height of the night sky. 5,000 years ago, the constellation Draconis was used to align the Great Pyramid. In addition to lining up with the stars of Draconis, the coils of Serpent Mound also align with the solar events of the solstice and equinox, as well as the 18.6-year lunar cycle. Could these precise astronomical alignments suggest that the Serpent Mound served a greater purpose than just acting as a marker? Some believe that because of its magnetic anomalies, this site may also have been used to harness energy. These magnetic anomalies, these faults, attract lightning. The Serpent Mound is right on the edge of an outcropping of pure limestone or dolomite, which is even better than the limestone they built the Great Pyramid from, and it's highly semiconductive. This is what I call the Serpent Mound stone. It's an unusual feature. It seems to be made of a different kind of dolomite than what exists on the outcropping of the General Serpent. This stone could have been placed in the center of the oval. Therefore, you wouldn't get a lot of random strikes so much as you would a lot of strikes that would tend to come to the stone. Could the Serpent Mound have been a source of great energy? Might it have held an advanced alien technology that was somehow lost? When I look at our history of building ancient monuments like Stonehenge, the Sphinx, the pyramids, the Mayan temples, what it tells me is, no matter how technologically advanced we are today, we've lost a knowledge of something tremendous that came thousands and thousands of years ago. And it's a tragedy that not only have we forgotten how to utilize it, but we've relegated it to the realm of folklore and mythology. When the lightning lamps were eliminated, native cultures fell into darkness again at about 5,000 years ago. But we know that if their prophecies hold true, the Serpent Mound will be reactivated again one day. And when that reactivation occurs, that will be the beginning of the restoration of the Earth. Was the Great Serpent Mound really a hub of ancient extraterrestrial visitation? If so, perhaps there is also truth in legends of other, even more bizarre alien encounters in the American West. Palmyra, New York, September 21st, 1823. In the upstairs bedroom of a log cabin just south of this small rural village, 17-year-old Joseph Smith had a vision of someone, or something, not of this world. It was late at night, it was dark, and the room filled with a very, very bright light, and this personage was floating in midair. His feet were off the ground, and he identified himself as Moroni. After talking with Joseph Smith for a while, Moroni seemed to ascend into the air, completely leaving the room again, dark. The next morning, also, Moroni came back to Joseph Smith to show him the hidden golden book, which is what we know as the Book of Mormon today. According to the Book of Mormon, Moroni identified himself to Joseph Smith as a man who lived in America in the late 4th and early 5th centuries. But America was not Moroni's home. He claimed to have much more distant origins. Moroni claimed to be from the Pleiades star cluster, so a church today, 9 million members strong, believe that their church may have originated not of this world, but of another world. According to Joseph Smith, not only did Moroni claim to be from another planet, he also directed him to dig up the golden plates from the hill Cumorah, which scholars believe is a reference to an ancient Native American mound, much like the Serpent Mound. We have since found out that in burial mounds and other refuge mounds across the Native American region, we have such plates. These writing tablets have been found not just in North America, but also in South America. This entity tells Joseph Smith to go on a physical search for an object which we know could have been an archaeological finding. But if Moroni was a spiritual or metaphysical being, why would he give Joseph Smith physical objects with which to translate the plates? According to ancient astronaut theorists, Moroni may in fact have been a star being, an extraterrestrial, whose mission was to pass down to Smith and his followers the advanced knowledge of the mound builders. In Mormonism, actually, a lot of their theology is directly related to this idea of God and various angels and various spiritual beings living on different planets. According to Native American legends, the star beings left Earth thousands of years ago. At about the same time, ancient astronaut theorists believe extraterrestrials left Egypt. But if Joseph Smith's vision of Moroni was real, might this have been not so much a spiritual encounter as an extraterrestrial one? If so, perhaps there were other such alien visitations, ones which in turn fueled an increased interest in the stars. Throughout the 1800s, the 19th century, people were very interested in astronomy. There was some thought that there might be life on other planets, so oftentimes lights in the sky were attributed to possibly visitors from another world. Joseph Smith felt such a strong connection to the Native Americans that he believed they could help guide him to a new Holy Land, which he called the New Zion. Although Smith died in 1844, the victim of mob violence, his successor Brigham Young ultimately led the Mormons further west, to Utah, in 1849. When the Mormons arrived in the area of Parowan Gap, local Ute leader Chief Wakara told them they had entered God's own house and showed them proof in the form of petroglyphs dating back thousands of years. All throughout Utah, petroglyphs depict hunters with bows and arrows going after buffalo. Very ordinary daily life occurrences. But there are also some other depictions which are very odd, and they look like spaceships. They look like beings with halos. They look like beings with antennae on their heads, or beings that wear some type of a suit. For all intents and purposes, they look like depictions of spacemen. Great Falls, Montana, October 19, 1865. 6 months after the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln, a fur trapper reports what might be the first documented UFO crash in the Old West. In 1865, the Missouri Democrat reported that a trapper saw a light traveling through the sky at night, flew over his camp, broke apart, and crashed in the forest some miles away. The next day, he tracked it down, found a large stone embedded inside the mountain. It was hollow. It was cracked open. He claimed there were chambers inside of it, and there were hieroglyphic markings on it. And there was also some mysterious liquid spilled around the area. But the newspaper went so far as to suggest that these were meteoric conveyances of aliens from Mercury or Uranus. So the whole idea of UFO crashes was explored in the 19th century, almost 100 years before Roswell. What makes this story even more intriguing to ancient astronaut theorists is the location of the sighting, along the upper Missouri River. This is the home of the Blackfoot Indians, a tribe whose ancient legends include strange tales of star beings visiting the region from other worlds. The Blackfoot have very profound legends and myths relating to beings which quite clearly are said to have come down from some kind of sky world, touring in their sky vehicles, and the way that they are described, these can be modern ideas of flying saucers or UFOs. Could the object that the Montana fur trapper claimed to have found really have been one of the alien crafts described in Blackfoot legends? And might the markings have been the same as what Joseph Smith found on the golden plates? To some Native Americans, like Chief Standing Elk of the Yankton Dakota tribe, star beings are still very much among us, and they are still making contact with humans. A lot of our relatives that come from the stars, they speak on a telepathic level, and there were some that came to me and showed me a bar with symbols on it. They talked to me, and I understood them very, very well. This is a replica of one of the bars that was in one of the lightships, and they represent universal laws, and they're guarded by the star people. So these are universal laws. Did early Americans really encounter what the natives called star beings as they crossed the frontier? And what other strange encounters might they have experienced as they made their way further west? Tombstone, Arizona. In 1881, this mining boomtown was the home of Wyatt Earp and the site of the gunfight at the OK Corral. Less than 10 years later, it would become the location of one of the most bizarre UFO sightings in history. According to a story in the Tombstone Epitaph, in 1890, ranchers were out in the desert of Arizona when they saw some sort of monstrous bird flying overhead with a huge wingspan.